How long should you be running your grow lights? That's what we're going to talk about in today's episode because there's a lot of variables that affect how long those lights should be on. But the grow lights are a wonderful tool that can help you grow more food, help you get an earlier start to your seed starting season, and really help to have healthier plants in the long run. So let's go. So the first variable we're going to look at is how far away the lights are away from the plants. This is a really important variable because if your lights are too far away from your plants, it may not be the worst thing in the world, but you're going to have to run them longer. I'll explain. So in this case here, we have our grow light and it's hung by an S-hook and just a metal chain. Now this light is stationary. It's not really going to move. We could adjust it a little bit. We could probably get another 6-7 inches lower on this light if we really wanted to. But for the most part, this light is staying at the height that it is. And if it was on a pulley system, we could lower it and raise it. But this light, like I said, is basically right here. And so it makes a big difference whether we're growing these rosemary cuttings, which are about 2.5 feet below the light, or these chive plants, which are like 10-12 inches below the light. Makes a huge difference about how much light is actually touching these plants. Because all plants need light energy to grow. And the light energy that's coming from these grow lights here has to travel a far less distance to touch these leaves than it does those rosemary cuttings. And so if your light is further away, there's going to be more light that's wasted that's not actually touching your plants. And your plants need a certain amount of light energy in order to grow. Otherwise, they're going to get leggy or they're not going to grow at all. So when it comes to these plants right here that are only about 10-12 inches away from the grow light, these plants right here would be fine with this grow light only being on about 10 to 12 hours a day. And that's because they're getting plenty of light energy to grow, they're not showing any signs of legginess, and they're really responding very well to the light that's being given. Now, any extra light is just as if you were outdoors. There's a minimum threshold that all plants need. For things like leafy greens, you might be fine with about 4 hours. For things like tomatoes, you might need 5 to 7 hours. But what happens if you give them more than 7 hours? Well, just the better they're going to be. They're not going to be affected by getting extra light. They're just going to, maybe grow a little faster. Maybe they're going to be a little less stressed. Maybe they're going to produce more fruit. They will only have a positive benefit from giving them more than that. Same thing, like a lot of you ask what happens with plants like in Alaska where they get 24 hours of sunlight. Well, they just grow that much better. They don't have a very long rest cycle. Rest cycle is what happens when the lights shut down. And so it really allows these plants to grow at their optimum capacity. Now, compare that to the ones that are about 2.5 feet below the lights. How do those compare? So in the case of these rosemary cuttings here that we're rooting, these are about 2.5 feet away from the grow lights. Even this potato experiment, the Martian potato experiment, these are about 2 feet away from the grow lights. And they are going to need a lot more light for a lot longer because of the fact that there's so much light being wasted. Now, obviously, we could move the table up or bring the lights down, and we could reduce how long we're running these lights. But basically, these are going to need about 16 hours of light versus about 10 where they're much closer. And that's, again, because they're not nearly as close, so light is actually being wasted throughout the room. There's light particles hitting the table. There's light particles, hitting the wall. There's light particles that are being spread out that are not actually touching these leaves, so the leaves aren't able to actually uptake that light energy and grow with it like these plants are that are much closer. The second variable that we're going to look at are the types of plants we're growing. As I just said, certain plants can handle less light than others. So if we were growing, for instance, leafy greens indoors for just salad throughout winter, the lights are only going to need to be on for about 10-12 hours a day. Compare that to early spring where we're growing tomato plants. They require so much more light. The plants get a lot larger, they produce a whole lot more fruit. So those lights are going to be on for 16, even 18 hours, or sometimes even more than that if needed. And so the type of plant that you're growing makes a big difference. Now we also need to take that variable and add that to the distance that they are away from the lights, because that makes a big difference, like I said. So for instance, lettuce, if they were just growing in these conditions 2+ feet away from these lights, which we'll talk about, they really make a big difference because we're going to start our threshold in an ideal case scenario. In an ideal case scenario at around 10 hours. Then based on the variables, if the variables become less favorable, like the distance is too far or whatever, the lights aren't as strong, which we'll talk about, we're going to increase hours to make up for those unfavorable conditions. And that's where you get your range of around 10 hours to 12 hours, right? That's why a lot of people ask, well, why for tomatoes is it 16 to 18 or even 20 hours? Well, it's because of those variables, and we'll get into that. The third variable is the efficiency of the light, and that's kind of what I was just alluding to in the second variable, is that based on your grow light, you may need a longer duration of exposure to that grow light than had you had a more efficient or a more powerful grow light. Efficiency makes a big difference because that's based on how much light is being given off. If your light is fairly weak and it's fairly far away from your plants, you're really adding a lot of those negative growing conditions up to where you're going to need a longer duration of grow light that they're being exposed to. Very, very simple. These grow lights here are about 30,000 lumens each. Now, again, we talk about this all the time. The minimum threshold for a grow light should be 2,000 lumens, and that's at about 6 to 7 inches away from the plant. Every 1,000 lumens you go up, you can add about an inch of distance from the plant. So if you were at 3,000 lumens, they can be about 6 to 7 inches away. At 4,000 lumens, they can be about 7 to 8 inches away or so. You're going to add about 1 inch per 1,000 lumens, and so these 30,000 lumen setups can be roughly about 35 inches away from the plant and be adequate. Very, very fine. So that's why I think it's very important that you understand the more powerful the grow light, the more light is being given off, but also that means more light energy, which means you don't have to run them as often. If I was running, these are 8 bulbs. So if I turn off half these lights, I'm only running on half the energy. I'm only emitting half the growable light. Meaning, if my plant's distance has not changed, but my light has become weaker, or let's say I just bought a weaker light, I only had a 4 bulb setup, my plants either have to get closer, I have to change those variables, or I have to increase the time that the light is on to make up for those variables, basically. And so in this case here, I would need to go from maybe 12 hours up to maybe 16 hours. And the time that your plants need is really based on how they react. I cannot give you a set time, and I know that's maybe frustrating. I cannot give you a set time in which your plants should be under your grow lights because it's based on all of those variables, and it's going to be different for everybody. And there's no exact science or formula that's going to tell you, this light for this time at this distance and all that stuff. Very challenging to do that without having a bunch of tools and measuring techniques and things like that. Just from the basic eye, I'm going to look at my plants. I'm going to say, are they getting leggy? Are they getting yellow? Are they slow growing? Right? Those things. Those are kind of cues that you look at. If they are showing those signs, you're going to need to change up your variables. The length of time, the amount of light, the distance from the light, things like that. All right, the final variable that affects how long your grow lights need to be on is the environment of your grow room. Now, this might seem a little bit confusing, but it'll make a whole lot of sense in a second. We go back to what I call wasted light. Wasted light is a variable because the more wasted light you have, the longer your lights have to be on because that's going to make up for the light being wasted. So if your environment of your grow room is conducive or efficient for preserving that wasted light, it's going to reduce how much light is being wasted. So key example is on the back, we have all these white boards that are painted white. White is very reflective. If you have light that gets wasted into corners of your grow room or gets absorbed into colors that are very absorbative and not very reflective, that's going to result in wasted light, and that wasted light has to be compensated with more time. Time is the cure-all for a lot of these variables, as you're finding out. Another thing too is like reflectors, right? We have these reflectors on here because reflectors, well, they reflect. And that's awesome because on this side of the grow room, we don't have anything reflective. So by this grow tower here, we have essentially this metallic surface that bounces the light back up at our plants, and that reduces how much light is being wasted. Now, obviously, that is kind of difficult to quantify. You can't say, okay, is this 25% better? Is this 50% better? But again, it all goes into the same equation, which is the type of plants we're growing, the type of lights we have, how far those lights are away from the plant, and as well as how efficient my grow room is, right? All of those things have to do with how long my lights are on. So I know you're probably sitting there thinking, well, Luke, I was kind of expecting an exact time. Like, just tell me how much time I need to have my grow lights on. But it's so difficult to do that. As I said, there are LED lights and compact fluorescent lights. And if you want to learn more, we have done a whole video. We've done many videos about compact fluorescent versus LED. There's also different powered lights. Some are 50 watts, others are 300 watts. They have different lumens. Some are 2,000, others are 30,000. Those variables, I can't give you an exact number because I don't know what grow light you have. And everyone has a different setup, right? My setup is going to be way different than your setup is. Everyone's grow room is going to be a different color, right? Not everyone has a white grow room with metallic reflectors. It's different for everybody. And so all I can tell you is that the nice thing is that the threshold is going to be at least 10 hours. 10 hours is the threshold. Don't go less than that. That's a good starting point. But then typically, if you go past 18 hours, you have to do something much different. After 18 hours, something is not working. You either need to decrease your lights, increase your power. You should never exceed 18 hours. So the relieving thing for me at least is that I have an 8-hour window to kind of mess and learn and jury-rig around to make sure that I have a grow light that's on for the right amount of time that's going to be growing my plants to the best of its capabilities. And so that 8-hour window, I want you to start with. And then also taking with that knowledge what you're growing and knowing that a tomato, for instance, a fast-growing, high-producing plant isn't going to be 10 hours. It's going to start at maybe 12 hours and go to 18. That decreases your window of kind of confusion to about a 6-hour window, which isn't that challenging. You can figure that out pretty quick within a basic, maybe half a growing season. And so that first growing season with your grow lights is going to be a trial phase. Start early, start now. I always tell everybody start early and start now so you can get those question marks out of the way before the actual growing season begins, before your seed starting season begins, because you can experiment with your grow lights and maybe waste, $5-6 in electricity, but you're going to be saving, hundreds, if not potentially thousands of dollars in the long run once you actually have that aha moment. Once you get your grow lights dialed in, you're going to already have all of those question marks answered. So spend that time right now to do that. Grow something fast growing like a tomato plant, and then grow something slower growing like an herb. Kind of just test them out, see how your grow lights react, or see how your plants react to your grow lights, and then that's going to give you some better ideas as to how long those grow lights should be on. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new. If you did, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and if this did help you out in some way, please let me know in the comments box below. It's good confirmation for me that I'm at least sharing this information to you and it makes sense to you. So if you have any questions though as well, that means I missed something, please comment down below as well and I'll be happy to answer that. So as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel reminding you to grow bigger. Take care. Bye.